Let's talk about some books I read recently. A couple of these I read in January. A few of them I actually read at the tail end of last year. I want to do a few videos here and there where I talk about multiple books. My main, I guess, content format is to talk about one book at length, and it's also the type of content that I love to consume. So I did post a video last week about this book, Deborah Levy's Things I Don't Want to Know, and it was a very long, in-depth conversation about this book. I wouldn't really categorize it as a review because I did go very deep into the themes. It's more like just having a conversation with someone after you read the book, and that's what I want those videos to feel like. But then there are so many books that I know that I won't be doing in that format, either because I didn't really enjoy them, or I didn't finish them, or I just don't have all that much to say. I picked a couple from last year that I thought you guys will like, and then I'll talk about the 5 or so that I read in January. These are the 3 books that I read at the tail end of last year. I'll quickly go over this because, like I said, there is a book video currently live on my channel where you can hear me talk about this at length. But this is the first book that I read by Deborah Levy. This is quite popular, I think, especially on Book Talk, BookTube. So I knew of this book for a while. But one day I was in this bookstore and they had this thing where in some of the books they had, I almost want to say like a bookmark, but it was pretty thick. And they hand wrote things about that book, about why they liked it. And it was reviews from the people who ran the bookstore. So I picked up this one and it had such a memorable little note that I had to pick it up. I was like, wow, somebody really sold that to me so well. I do think that you can learn something from absolutely everybody's story, but there are just some memoirs and autobiographies that I don't really feel like I get into because I'm not that invested in the person. But in this case, I don't think you have to be invested or know anything about the author. She talks a lot about why she writes, and some of the parts she even disagrees with George Orwell, because in this particular book she's trying to talk about why women write and what experiences in women's life drive them to use words and literature as a way to express themselves, and I think that was really beautifully done in this book. The next book I want to talk about is Seicho Matsumoto's Inspector Imanishi Investigates. So this book, he's actually the same author who wrote Tokyo Express, which I feel is a lot more popular. I've seen that book everywhere in the classic section. This one I hadn't seen before. I don't know what exactly about this book. I mean, the cover is absolutely beautiful. I also do have to give them a shout. This edition, the spacing font, it's so easy to read. It's very chunky, but at no point did I feel like it was difficult. Like I can open it all the way, and it didn't really ruin the spine either. I read it every day for 2 weeks, throwing it around, and it's pristine condition. So just taking a moment to really appreciate this edition of Penguin Classics. I have seen some in baby pink that I also want to pick up. I don't know which books they are. I have to find some that I'm interested in, but I really love the edition. Anyways, as a young reader, when I was really young, like the first 3 years that I probably got into books and reading was in middle school. My middle school years, I read a lot of, was it Secret 5? Like something like that, and then Nancy Drew. And then after that, I used to take a lot of my mom's like old books and read them too. But I used to read a lot of crime, and I feel like as an adult, I don't read that much crime anymore, and that makes me sad. And I feel like this book reignited my love for crime novels because it was just so atmospheric. A lot of people say that Japanese literature has this very like nostalgic feel to it. I've read a lot of Japanese authors, and I don't think that's the case with absolutely everyone. People do say that a lot about Murakami, and I agree. And I would definitely say that it was true for this particular author. Every single character feels really like that you're there talking to them. The 1960s Tokyo scenes that are described are really vivid, really beautiful. But more than anything, you're reading this crime story that's set against the political climate at the time in the 1960s. And I really love reading historical fiction. This is just historical fiction and crime coming together in the best way possible. I feel like this is a really pretty gift for anyone in your life that loves a crime novel. But if you like crime, or if you love nostalgic Japanese literature, I would definitely recommend this. And I really want to read Tokyo Express next. So both of these books added something to my reading list for this year. Even Deborah Levy, I have her 2 books, Hot Milk and Black Vodka, which is a collection of short stories that I definitely want to read this year. The last book from last year that I want to talk about is I Who Have Never Known Men, and I think this is like one of the most popular books that I've heard about in the last few years. So I picked it up right before a flight. I'm not someone who can focus a lot during flights, but I did manage to read a large chunk of this during my flight, and I think that says a lot. It kept me captivated from the beginning to the end. I will do an in-depth video on this book. It should come up in the next couple of weeks, and because of that, I'm not going to go too deeply into the book right now, but it is about 40 women who are living in an underground bunker, and they are being watched over at all times. They have no recollection of how they ended up there or why they're there, but they've been there for the longest time. One of them actually was there since she was a child. So all these other women, they came there much later in life, so they were already adults and they remember the past lives that they had. Whereas this one girl, she doesn't have any recollection of who she was, who her mother is, where everyone is, and even what it is like to live outside of this bunker. She has no recollection of the world outside the bunker. So something must have happened that led her to, forget everything, or she must have been really, really young. We don't really know. She's the one who's narrating this book, and it's just such a unique perspective from someone who has not experienced the world as the rest of us. It's made me think about how much of our fears are learned. And if we didn't know and experience the world, then our perspective and everything would be so different. It's also very timeless. It's hard to say when this book is set or even written. If you told me it was written last year because it was so dystopian, I would believe that. If you told me this was written 100 years ago, I'd believe that too. So it's like the best compliment I can give this book. It feels so timeless, and I can see this being a book that people can pick up 100 years from now and still be like as impressed by the very unique perspective of the narrator. So definitely one that I recommend. Now let's talk about the 5 books I picked up last month. I finished this one, and this one. So I finished 3 and 2 of them are unfinished. I'll start with the worst and then we'll get to the best. This is Philosophy of the Home, Domestic Space and Happiness by Emanuele Coccia or Coccia. I don't want to butcher the name. I should have looked it up before I started filming. But for me, apart from books, another passion is interior, home, space, design. I love everything to do with interior spaces. And the reason for that is when I was little, like I've always had this fascination with people's rooms and how they can almost be like an extension of people's identity, and especially with myself. I remember when I first moved to the UK, I had nothing but to call my own but my room, and I, as someone who was very much like a poor student, I didn't have the resources to make my space look very, very nice, but I did my best, and it just felt like such a safe space for me in a place where I didn't know anyone. And that carried through every single phase of my life. I can remember that I had a room to always go and feel very safe in. And I think I carried that with myself even now. In my current apartment, it's like my safe space, and every single thing that I put here around me, I love so much, and I've put so much time and effort into curating the space. And I kind of wanted to read about that philosophy that goes into, people's relationships with their homes and how that's evolved over time, especially in modern society where the third space, as they call it, is like really disappearing, and people are spending more and more time indoors in their homes. People are taking more time to make these interior spaces feel more like themselves. It's a form of expression, just like fashion. And how by looking at someone's fashion, you can get a glimpse of who they are as people. And I feel very similarly about interior spaces, that by looking at people's homes, you can sometimes get a glimpse of who they are. And I find that so fascinating. That was a subject matter that I wanted to read about. But this book, although the title and the content suggest it'll be about something like that. It's not at all. It's more like a memoir of this person. That's one thing. I don't think that's bad that I expected something and got something different if that different was still readable. I think if you read this in Italian, maybe it's really good, because when I read it as a translation, there were many times where I'm so confused why it was translated like that. There's so much that feels so badly written, and it's almost like someone took 12 different essays about completely different things and somehow forced it under this topic. Because he'll talk about bathrooms for 2 sentences and then go into a childhood story of his. He'll talk about social media for 2 seconds and then he'll go into a completely different story about moving. Some of the beginning part, like there are pages where I've underlined so much and there was such good material, such good food for thought, and then I'll be like, okay, maybe it's going well, and then I'll continue. Only 2 pages later to be like this. I don't know if you can see this, but it says lol, no. And then I'll turn the page. I have a question mark right there. I never disrespect my books like these, but some of the stuff was just so weird. I don't know. I don't think there's anything really wrong with the book or what the person is saying. I just feel like it was mismarketed. But then again, there were some parts that I thought they were really good. It's really hard to review books that I have such mixed feelings about. But yeah, that's what this is, or rather what it's not. But what I talked about, the philosophy and the connection people have to their homes and living spaces, if you know a book about that topic that's good, please recommend it to me. The next 2 books are 2 books that I did not finish. But I still want to talk about them because, you'll be shocked. This and this, both of them, are authors who have won the Nobel Prize for Literature. I didn't pick them up because of that, but it's just books like this one. I think I've had for 2 years in my collection. I just really wanted to read it in like winter, and it was kind of snowing at that time, and I thought it would be perfect. This is Snow Country by Yasunari Kawabata. Okay, let me cover this first. This is a story about a very insufferable man who is having an affair with a geisha who lives in the snow country in Japan. So he travels to the snow country and he meets this girl and he starts to get involved with her. But it's very clear that she falls for him. And she's like, the more he's pulling away, the more in love she's falling with him, which I think as women, we can all relate to that experience, that sometimes we just fall for the wrong people. But this is just a story about a fuckboy at the end of the day. Like, this man is insufferable. And the issue I have with the book is, again, related to translation, maybe, because the writing and the descriptions are so beautiful. You feel like you're in that moment. The characters are really beautiful, but I could not tell when I was reading about a past event and when I was brought back into the future. I also couldn't really tell in the beginning which woman I'm reading about. I couldn't tell if it was one person that he was talking about, like one girl, or if it was like 2 different girls, or one girl in different periods of our lives. It was so confusing. But somehow when I got a hang of it, because I looked on everywhere and I found like one Reddit thread they were equally confused. So I was like, okay, I'm not the only one. And then I tried to figure out like why the man is pulling away and like what he's like. I don't know. You just can't get a grasp. I'm happy to be called dumb in this book if it's really, really good enough. I'm the only person who didn't get it. I read books for enjoyment at the end of the day. It was beautifully written, but I didn't get anything out of it. Not enjoyment, and I didn't really understand what was the point of the story either. So maybe there are some other works by him that I will enjoy more. This is not an insult. I can really tell that he's an excellent writer. I really think that it portrayed some of the complex feelings about that type of a relationship and affair really, really well. And there's a lot of other things that I also enjoyed about the book, but there were also lots of things that confused me and I didn't feel like I was really getting much out of it. So I decided to leave it. But I did leave it at a very good point. So I read part 1 and part 2 is where I left it. So if I ever want to go back and feel like, you know what, that was not that bad, maybe I'll go back and finish it. I can. But just in that moment, I was like, I can't read any more of this. I'm not enjoying myself. Next, Toni Morrison. she's the favorite author of a lot of people who love reading and books. And I completely see why. I read like 2 pages where I was like, okay, this is clearly one of the best writings I'm ever going to read in my life. I refuse to believe that these people she's writing are not real people. Everything feels like she's just writing what she's seeing in front of her. It's so visual. I don't think I can sit here and quite explain to you how amazing Toni Morrison is as a writer, and I feel like thousands of people have done it way better than me. But all I'll say is I ended up picking up a book by her that nobody has ever talked about, at least not the people I watch and follow. And I love jazz. So I was like, this sounds like the perfect book for me. But I came to the conclusion after I read half. So there's like 200 pages. I read 100. I came to the conclusion that I am a little bit too young for this particular book. I have Beloved. I've heard good things about Sula. I have Songs of Solomon. I'm going to pick a different book and I'm going to read it because I absolutely love her writing. This particular story, I think I'm a little bit too young right now. Why? I'll tell you. The main protagonist, Violet, is about 50 years old, and she used to work in the fields somewhere in southern states in America, and then she migrates to New York with her husband, Joe Trace, and they make their whole lives in New York. But then Joe cheats on her with an 18-year-old girl, and I won't give you spoilers, but something happens, and basically she's lived her whole life loving one man and building her life with one man, and this is all she ever knows. And now she's brought to the realization that maybe all of that didn't mean anything, and like whatever she thought her life was not that anymore, and she has to rebuild her entire existence, and even she has so much to figure out. And the book was so beautiful, the writing is so sharp, but I feel like that feeling, the more I read it, the more I was like, I should come back to this in about 10, maybe 20 years. There are loads of books that I read in my life where I felt like I'm a little bit too old for this. Maybe I would have enjoyed it when I was 16. For the first time, I feel like I will enjoy this a bit more when I've experienced more of life. And that's completely okay. And that's not a criticism of this book. It's just, I want to read it with a different lens on. Just right book, wrong time. Anyways, if you read it and if you really enjoyed it, let me know what you think. But just really impressed and so happy that I finally picked up one of her works, because I definitely need to make my way through the rest. Let's take a little break and talk about a fun one. This is Manga Stories by Haruki Murakami, and this illustrated, what would you call them, graphic novel, includes 4 of his short stories: Super Frog Saves Tokyo, Where I'm Likely to Find It, Birthday Girl, and The Seventh Man. The only one I was familiar with was with Birthday Girl, but I haven't read any of these. Just for context, I've read every single Murakami book there is, apart from his most recent one, The City and Its Uncertain Walls, and a couple of his short stories. I want to talk about the person who illustrated it. They call themselves PMGL. PMGL illustrates magazines and underground comics and publishes comic strips, short stories, and feature comics. He also teaches human morphology and anatomy to animators and video game artists. On the side, he collects 45 RPM records from the 70s and DJs under the nom de plume, Coffee Natto. I think it's so cool. And it's even cooler because all these 4 stories have been illustrated by one person in 4 completely unique styles. Like for one of them, the first one gives you that like really sticky, gross feeling that you get when you read some of Murakami's works. And if you read them, you know exactly what I'm talking about. This like almost like ugh feeling. The second one has this like almost film noir, like this beautiful black and white imagery, and the features of the people are also very, very different. Then you go to the third one, and this has that like almost very like sepia tone, but also mysterious, kind of like black magic, the more magical realism aspects of Murakami. I feel like that one is kind of like that. And the last one has a very nostalgic filter to it. Very, very pretty. And to be able to illustrate 4 stories in 4 different ways, is so skillful. But more than that, I just am so impressed by how accurately they did this. Like, when I'm reading Murakami, I feel like this is exactly what I picture in my head. And it's done so well. If you have a Murakami fan, or if you are a Murakami fan, I would highly recommend. It made me fall in love with this particular story, like Birthday Girl. I really want to read the full book now, the full short story, because this story, I kept thinking about it for like at least a few hours after I read it, like continuously. And this is just an illustrated. It takes you 20 minutes to read it, but it just stuck with me for so long. I won't make a full video about this, so that's why I really wanted to talk about it in this video. It's so good. The last one, Joan Didion, Play It As It Lays. This is not my first Joan Didion. I actually read another book by her called Let Me Tell You What I Mean. And it was a collection of short essays that I didn't feel particularly strongly about. I felt that they were okay. I didn't really understand why people were so in love with her writing, because that one, some of them were okay, some of them were like, I don't know why this has been published. But then I just dropped it. I didn't think I would enjoy anything else. Up until Christmas, I really wanted to get myself a book for Christmas, and I didn't have anything on my list, and this came up, and I was like, you know what? I feel like a lot of people who give me really good recommendations online like Joan Didion, so let me give it another go. And this is one of the best books I've read in a while. It was absolutely brilliant. The way she writes these characters, similar to Toni Morrison, so real. And Play It As It Lays, the name, after you finish reading the book, I was like, okay, this is just incredible wordplay, because the way I interpreted this book is that the narrator, she is an actress. She's done a few things here and there, and a lot of her projects are with her husband. And she's come to a point in her life where, you know, something happened to her daughter, and she starts questioning her whole life and everyone in it. To her, it just seemed like for the longest time, she was just following the motions of life. She was just playing the game in the best way possible. She had, you know, learned a few strategies, learned a few ways to defeat other people and maybe get ahead. But in the end, it just felt really pointless to her, because everyone else still seemed interested in the game, in playing the game. But she more and more felt disillusioned by it, or at least that's how it seems. But in the end, I think she also comes to the conclusion that she is still continuing to play it, even if she doesn't want to admit it. And I think that's what makes it interesting read, because I think a lot of people, especially in our late 20s, early 30s, come to this realization that we've just been following a lot of what we are told to do up until a certain point where you feel like, now what? Like, I've done everything and I feel like I'm nowhere close to what I want to do. And this workplace or this environment that I'm in doesn't feel like it's real. Like, sometimes you feel so disillusioned by life, and then you start questioning everything. And a lot of the times, either we, you know, forget, try not to think so deeply about things and just, you know, keep going. Like, it almost reminds me of that moment where you're in a meeting and the person is saying stuff and you're like, in your head thinking like, what the hell? But in outside, you have to be like, you know, like, especially those super corporate environments where you find yourself saying things and doing things in such a robotic, strange manner, but it's sort of what is expected and what is praised. And then suddenly you just think like, what am I doing? Like, why am I behaving like this? And it's similar to her, but obviously set back in the backdrop of LA, Hollywood, and it's just so beautiful, the scenery and all of that. And still, the disillusionment with all of that fantasy hits her so hard. But I guess you just have to figure out, does she want to keep playing? Does she want to quit? And why do people around her realize that they're playing and they're part of the game but still want to continue doing it? Like, what is it that make people realize at a certain point that it's all very comical and it's all very strange, but still want to keep fighting and competing and getting ahead in life? And I think that was just so beautifully done through this story. I want to talk about it in a lot more depth in the video that I do about it, but I hope that encouraged you to pick it up. I want to read a couple more by her, but I think I'm gonna try and stick to her fiction because that's what I enjoyed. Maybe I'll get to her nonfiction later. I heard so many good things about My Year of Magical Thinking, but sounds sad. I might pick it up though. But yeah, those are all the books that I read in the recent few months. I want to do this either every month or every few months when I have enough books to talk about. Let me know if you enjoy the format. I'll see you next time. Bye.